I just want to say that I'm very happy that I'm a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and I've been working on nuclear disarmament for a long time, and I was very aware of the role that Reaching Critical Will, which is the WILF disarmament program, was having at United Nations. And so when we decided that it would be good to have a WILF branch in Scotland, I was very keen to be part of that. The very first resolution of United Nations was to desist from the use of atomic energy as a weapon of war. And it's important to recognise that the two issues that the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom has always had at its core have been the upholding of human rights and women's ability to be part of the process of speaking out and making decisions, and the idea that there must be a better way than engaging in bloody conflict to resolve international disputes. And so WILF had a very important part in the establishment of the League of Nations and eventually United Nations. And so it's no surprise that that first resolution and WILF's consultative status at United Nations is embedded right from the very get-go. So why would you say that nuclear weapons need to be banned? There's a history of weapons that are regarded as completely unacceptable, even if you aren't a pacifist, even if you still believe that the use of force is justified in some cases. Even as far back as 1899, they recognised that dum-dum bullets were really just a step too far. They just weren't fair. They were indiscriminate. They couldn't control who they were likely to injure. And so the process of banning indiscriminate weapons for humanitarian reasons is intrinsic to the use of a weapon at times of war, or it should be. But it took till 2017 before we finally managed to achieve, hooray, the good news, the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty. And a lot of that was done through the work of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which was came together. It was founded in Melbourne in Australia, although the ideas behind it were endemic in nuclear disarmament campaigning all over the world. But I think from the outset, people had felt that they had to attach their campaigning to making change in their own government. And it was the idea that we could work collectively across the world and recognise that all nuclear weapons policies have been decided in secret by men. I say that without any hesitation whatsoever. The decision to adopt nuclear weapons and develop them has been undertaken secretly without democratic mandate by small groups of men. And so we need a different way of tackling that. We need to look at the democratic deficit that exists across the world with regard to these weapons. And so that was really what ICANN set out to do. And it now has 440 partner organisations in 100 countries. Keeps going up. I have to keep changing the slide. And it's a campaign not to gain a ban treaty. We ban nuclear weapons. It's a campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. It's an elimination campaign. We're not finished. Reaching Critical Will has had a hugely important part in it, and particularly since 2010, when Reaching Critical Will became very, very influential in managing and negotiating the involvement of NGOs, non-governmental organisations from across the world, in participating in negotiations at United Nations. And that was of enormous importance because it kept the focus on what we wanted to talk about. So Ban Ki-moon, the NPT negotiations being a complete disaster zone, the NPT, I'm sure you know all this, it's got 3 pillars. It says, well, the nuclear weapon states will get rid of their nuclear weapons, which they haven't done, in exchange for a promise that non-nuclear weapon states won't acquire more nuclear weapons, which has gone from 2 to 5 to 9. So that bit hasn't really worked, and everybody can have nuclear power. But that wasn't actually the original intention. It was atomic energy for peaceful usage, which in my book is something like X-rays. So the NPT, for my money, was a good try, good start, but it's failed to achieve its objectives. And the argument has always been based on some ideas about political security. And then the International Red Cross and Red Crescent, which is a partner organisation in ICANN, came up with this resolution at the same time as Ban Ki-moon was saying, you guys in your NPT, get your act together, you've got to do something a bit stronger than this. And this is what they said: incalculable human suffering. They said that the International Red Cross and Red Crescent could not respond if we go wrong. You know, you can have a tsunami, you can have a major earthquake, you know, you can have a civil war, you can have all sorts of disasters across the planet, and the International Red Cross and Red Crescent will be there picking up the pieces, helping people. Go to a nuclear major accident or a conflict and you're stuffed. They can't do it. That's what they were saying. And this term, catastrophic humanitarian consequences, meant that people really began to sit up and pay attention. And some of the world's governments chose to really explore that. And this is a picture of Bill from Scotland, an MSP, and some other Scottish campaigners at the very first of those conferences, which was hosted by Oslo. And there were 128 of the world's governments turned up to that, which gives some indication of how worried the international community was about what the crazies that have the nuclear weapons were likely to cause to happen to our planet. So they had 3 of these conferences, and they were all hosted by different countries. And the thing that really came out of the conferences was this business about there is no effective humanitarian response possible. You know, you're really stuffed, and that is even more the case now than it was during the height of the Cold War in the 1980s, because at that time we didn't have the internet and we weren't completely dependent on that form of communication to do just about anything. So if you're talking about a nuclear exchange, you're talking about taking that infrastructure out. And the other big change that makes it even worse is what we now know about climate change. And you talk about your carbon footprint, or what do you think is going to happen if you chuck an entire city carbonized into the atmosphere? You know. So no effective humanitarian response, and that the NPT wasn't working because there's a big legal gap right in the middle of it, particularly when it comes to disarmament. There's an idea about disarming in good faith at some time, and it's not fit for purpose. And so it was decided at that stage, United Nations went, okay, world's countries, let's get this sorted. We'll have a conference, and we'll see who comes to it, and we'll make it open to all member states, and we'll discuss how we can progress nuclear disarmament and meet everybody's security concerns. So they set up this, it was mandated in 2015, and it went on for quite a long time, and reported in October 2016. And the conference took place in different parts. There were 3 quite lengthy sessions. That's me being Scottish Wolf at the conference. And I'd like to just say a little bit about that, because I was very nervous. I knew I was going to get to make a presentation, and I had the full weight of responsibility on my shoulders, and I was thinking, I'm Wolf. And the stuff about the disproportionate impact of ionizing radiation on women and girls very much in my mind. The very macho discourse of such a sexist nature that equates power and strength in such a negative way, that gives gives a background to making it possible to develop policies that are supportive of nuclear weapons. And then the people that I was staying with were Quakers. I'm a Quaker as well as a Wilfer. The people that I was staying with, the guy was the archivist for United Nations NGO CUNO office. And he came in and he said, "Oh, yeah, I think you'd be interested in this, Janet." And he showed me the photograph, and it was a photograph of a bunch of women, loads of them. There were about a couple of hundred women from across Switzerland and France who had come to the very building that we were meeting in Geneva. And they had come with prams and toddlers and children. And they were there to object in the early 1960s to French atomic testing. And they had a great big banner that they put up, and it said, "We have had enough." And I thought, God, they had enough in 1960. Where are we going with this? You know? So I based my presentation on that. And I was enormously proud of being able to do that and make that intervention. And so, at the same time as this, none of the nuclear-armed states showed up at this. They said it was a piece of nonsense, it wasn't going to work, it was not worth coming to. The NPT was the way to go. Didn't we know when we were naive? And Matt Rowland, the British guy, actually said that we were naive and ignorant of true international security policies if we thought a banned treaty was going to do any good. So they weren't going to come. But actually they knew fine well that a banned treaty was a good idea and that it was going to work. So the United States government sent this. It's a non-letter which was sent out to all their NATO allies. The effects of a treaty to ban nuclear weapons could degrade enduring security relations. Yes, that's the general idea. That's quite a good plan in my view. It could impact on non-parties, that's people that don't sign it, as well as parties, even prior to its entry into force. Yes, it would. Yes, it has. Yes, it does. 50 major financial institutions have disinvested in nuclear technology since the treaty was signed, before it's even entered into force. Deutsche Bank, for example. It's inconsistent with NATO's deterrence and defence posture. Yes, it is, and hopefully they'll change it. So that was... So we went to New York, and I'm sorry about the Scottishness, but I can't help it. I'm very proud of them. These are our Scottish delegates to the conference. And I met Taniel there as well, so that was a very big plus. Because she was there from UK Wilf. But we had a big squad of us from Scotland. It was nearly all women, and they were all Wilf members. And but we were campaigning. We weren't just attending the conference in New York, and that's us out in the rain at one of the huge demonstrations on the eve of the negotiations. Absolutely fabulous occasion. But we were working very hard in the United Nations, in the room, talking to diplomats, counting the number of people that were there, holding side events. This is a side event. I thought I'd better put something in about the rest of the UK. So this is me with Fabian and Rebecca Johnson and the familiar face of Dave Webb from the CND and the lovely Tim Wallace, who used to be QPSW and used to be a UK person who has defected and is now working on the dark side, running a thing called nuclearban.us, which is an American compliance campaign which is proving to be enormously successful. They've now got the Californian state legislature to adopt support for the treaty. That's 12% of the population of the United States of America. So, you know, we do have an impact. But the people that really, really made the difference in the conference, I'm not going to go into all the stuff about the lobbying the diplomats, but because we did do that, and we got them there, and we got them to listen. But what was really most significant of all was the groups of people that really had the absolute moral authority to be talking about why we need to ban nuclear weapons. Sue, who is an Australian First Nation person, had a daughter of 47 years of age who died the year before the conference of cancer, having had 5 miscarriages. That's as a result of Sue's exposure to British testing in Maralinga. Sitting next to her is Setsuko Thurlow, who survived the attack in Hiroshima and saw her 4-year-old nephew turn to a blackened lump of unrecognisable flesh, who took 4 days to die after the... and one of the things that I remember Setsuko coming to Edinburgh and speaking to... We decided, of course she was 13 when it happened, we got a bunch of 13-year-olds into a room, and we got them to just listen to her testimony. And one of the things that she did was she brought out a very long yellow ribbon which had a lot of Chinese characters on it, and passed it around the room, and everybody held part of it. And she said, these are the names of my classmates who were vaporized. Every one of them had a name. Every one of them was loved by someone. So these were the messages that were being given, along with the messages from the academics and the experts. And we had wonderful people from Chatham House, Patricia Lewis, talking about risk and the increased risk that in the modern world of our tribal modernisation programme, which is infinitely more dangerous and prone to accident than the existing one. It's crazy. And we had the academics and doctors that have such great expertise on what the weapons do and how they impact on people, and the climate change experts talking about how a thermonuclear detonation could, even quite a comparatively small thermonuclear detonation, could cause famine across Africa by affecting the temperature of the country. So we won. On the 7th of July, this is the wonderful Elaine from Costa Rica who chaired the conference, and her whole team, you'll see there, all wore white on the day we signed the treaty. She knew we were going to win, and it's the colour for peace in Costa Rica. It was an absolutely marvellous. So what is it, this treaty? It's quite difficult sometimes to explain in a country where the government makes the law of the land, and then somebody has a big stick and everybody's got to obey it, and they think that's what's going to happen at UN, and it's not. Because those of us that are in the peace movement and understand the kind of processes for conflict resolution, that turning the tide or the alternatives to violence program, or these, it's much more like that process. Because what it's about, treaty law is about getting people that think the same way about something to agree together that they will make an agreement to behave in a particular kind of way that will reduce conflict and allow their needs to be met together. So what we now need is to have enough people to sign the treaty to bring it into force. So it was very difficult because obviously none of the nuclear weapon states showed up, and then they complained that we don't take their needs into account, which is quite hard to do if they're not there and they're not participating in the negotiations. As everybody who's ever done any conflict resolution work knows, you need to have everybody there if you're going to get a good result. You know. But we did get a good enough result. We got 122 member states of the United Nations committed to this process. And then they have to go back and talk to their people, talk to their governments, agree to sign it. It's open for signature on a certain day, and then once it's been signed, they then have to do a thing called ratifying it, which just means putting it through their national legislation. so that a country's leader can't just sign it and then get voted out and have somebody that disagrees with it a week later. It's got to be put into the country's legislation. So once all that's done, and that takes a while, then it will enter into force. And the number required for this treaty to enter into force is 50. So we had more than 50 people sign it the very first day it opened for signatures, which was just about a year ago. Ratification takes a bit longer. But it does effectively put nuclear weapons beyond the pale. And the ICANN process people have a tendency to think of ICANN as an organisation. It's not. It's a network which we can all be part of. And in this country, in the UK, in this state, I should say, there are about 30 ICANN partners. In the country of Scotland, there's 6 ICANN partners, organisations. And some of them are the obvious people you would expect to be in such a thing, but there's other smaller and different organisations as well. So you can work on the campaign in your own organisation, you can work collectively with other people, you can come together for a particular, like this rally that we're going to do in Scotland to mark a year of the treaty. Lots of partner organisations will come together, but then they'll be doing it in different ways. So when it opened for signature in Scotland, there was a thing called the Parliamentarians' Pledge. And again, it's important to understand that that is not about members of the Scottish Parliament being targeted, or even members of the UK Parliament being targeted. It's about parliamentarians across the whole world agreeing to work together to get all of the world's governments to join the treaty. So you can expect a French parliamentarian like Jean-Louis to work with us in getting our government to sign it. You can expect, even though our government hasn't signed it, you can expect parliamentarians from the Scottish Parliament, which is very committed to it, to work with German parliamentarians to work together on new provisions for NATO, for example. It's an international thing. But we opened it for signature, and that's Paul Wheelhouse, who's a senior cabinet minister, actually signing it in the Scottish Parliament. So we had a big ceremony the day that the actual treaty opened for signature to have a parliamentarian support open for signature. And we actually reflected that in Scotland with a citizens' pledge to support our parliamentarians as well. So in the south, this is, again, it's Fabian who signed it, and as a result of signing it, was allowed to hold the Nobel Peace Prize medal, because shortly after the treaty opened for signature, the next big thing was the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, which is all of you. Everyone in this room is part of that campaign to some degree or another. We're all Nobel laureates. And so that's a picture of me with the Welcome Campaigners banner and a wee bit of the Campaigners Conference, which we held. I just want to flag up, within the UK context, it is really, I'm not just being Scottish now, I'm actually pointing out that the Parliament and the First Minister of a country which is not just it's not just a regional little bit, it's not just an opinion, it's not a YouGov poll in Cornwall, it's actually a country which has devolved powers, it has its own parliament, it has a measurable and measured concrete response to the treaty. And this is what our First Minister said when she gave us a special torch to take to the Nobel Prize. This is what she said in October when we won the Nobel Peace Prize. We will never accept that a limit should be placed on the contribution that Scotland can make to building a better world. Our party stands as part of that global movement. We say no to nuclear weapons in the River Clyde or anywhere else. And that, I feel, is an asset to the campaign in the UK that is greatly underrated. We need to be using that. I'm not just saying that because I'm proud of being Scottish and being part of it. I'm saying it is a very concrete manifestation that when Matt Rowland or opens his mouth and says that they have a democratic mandate to renew Trident, and when Theresa May answers a Scottish politician and says she's willing to annihilate thousands and thousands of people, they do not have a democratic mandate, and they need to be reminded of this constantly. All the weapons are in Scotland. They've got nowhere else they can put them, which is why we're having this international demonstration, which you all know about anyway, so I'm not going to bang on about that, but it's an important part of our international work. This is just to give a flavour of how the NATO position is changing. William Blaise, who was the Secretary of NATO, has pointed out that, and just reminded people that it's not actually in the treaty. It may be a strategic policy, but it's not actually part of the North Atlantic Treaty. They can have a North Atlantic Treaty Organisation and choose to make it non-nuclear. As Taniel has so eloquently shown, the language of the treaty is beautiful. It was written with great care and love and attention. It was written with great consideration being given to those NATO countries and others who found themselves embroiled in the mechanics of the nuclear-armed behaviours that challenge and threaten all of us. And it is really a beautifully written document. There is not a phrase in it that is extra or spare or without meaning. So read it, take your copy, put it in a special place, choose a time when there isn't too much going on. You don't need to do it all at once. Read a bit of it and try and see where and why that's come into it. Make it part of your language and how you describe this. And ask your MP or your MSP if you're in Scotland to sign the pledge. And I've just got these nice two little book pictures which sum it up for me. And that's really what I wanted to say in terms of background, and I hope that we can get some good Q&A stuff going for the rest of this little bit of the session.
Wasn't that a splendid opener? Brilliant, brilliant pictures and background. And just so clear about the process. Running way back to 1899 of vicious weapons and they're being banned. So thank you for that contextual background. So, any questions? Yes, Richard.
Richard from Oldham. Can I just ask a very practical thing? Do you actually have a list of MPs and MSPs that have actually signed the parliamentary pledge, and those that refuse to sign as well would be useful?
I wouldn't say refuse because I'd never take no for an answer. But we certainly have a list of the ones that have signed.
Right.
And how you utilise that. Yeah. Thank you.
Two more questions? Any other questions, Phoebe?
Yeah, sorry, Phoebe from Stockport. What about MEPs? Are they relevant in this context?
Sorry.
MEPs.
Members of the European Parliament.
Yes.
Are they relevant in this context?
Yes, they are, and they can be asked. And the European Parliament is very supportive of the treaty.
As an example, Phoebe, Julie Ward, who is an MEP for here in the North West, is at the moment co-chair of Labour CMD, is it? Yeah.
What would happen if, or would Scotland be able to ban having any nuclear weapons on its territory? And would it be able to do it by itself, or that can only be done if the government agrees, the UK government agrees?
The position of the Scottish government is it's a devolved government. It doesn't have full control over everything. There are certain matters that are reserved to Westminster. One of them is foreign policy. One of them is defence. One of them is weapons of mass destruction. And one of them is nuclear weapons. They've really got it pretty sewn up that we are not allowed to play with any of those. Having said that, the atmosphere around dialogue has shifted, and there was a point where if you even tried to have a debate on the opinions at Holyrood, you'd get slapped down and told you weren't allowed to talk about that, and it was outside your devolved competence, and they'd take the ball away and not let you play at all if you carried on with that kind of chat. Whereas post-Brexit, suddenly we're allowed to talk about anything, you know. But
I can't remember who said it, but it was one of the Scottish MPs who said there's no other way to unite a room in Scotland than to talk about banning Trident. Everyone agrees. So
yeah, it's quite problematic because we now have to think of what we can ask them to do, because they've pretty much done. They've all signed the Parliamentarians' Pledge. The entire SNP, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party and quite a few Labour MSPs, the entire Green Party in Scotland, which gives us a ridiculously huge majority of the Scottish Parliament that have signed the Parliamentarians' Pledge. So, and most of our MPs have signed it as well, so there's not really a lot of point banging on about that in Scotland. You have to think of other things for them to do. If Scotland became independent, and if the politics of the Scottish government didn't change drastically, which is very unlikely, there is absolutely no doubt that that would disarm the UK, because they don't have anywhere else to put it. They don't have the infrastructure, and they don't have the money to redevelop an infrastructure. It's just a completely insane situation, and it is a major reason why they pulled out all the top guns to make sure that we didn't win the referendum.
Okay, one last question? No? Yes?
Just a really simple one. I was, I think, probably sleeping when Taniel first started speaking, and I was very interested to see those 12 pieces of paper up there.
yeah,
but where do I get them from?
there's a preamble in the treaty. So
That,
the
yeah,
preamble is the beginning.
Okay.
And it's like the context and the intention of the treaty.
Okay.
The only thing that isn't in there is the very top left corner is the law of proportionality, which is a law of armed conflict.
Okay.
It's part of international humanitarian law, and it's linked to when they talk about collateral damage, when they might argue something like a school was bombed, however there was a military leader there, and can you argue that the 50 children who were killed were worth the death of that military leader? And that's how collateral damage is argued. So that's part of the law of proportionality. So I put that there because it relates specifically to things that are referred to in the treaty. And I would argue, I think any sane person would argue, that a nuclear weapon could never ever be argued to be